The tension in the political debate hall was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former White House press secretary and governor of Arkansas, had just launched what she thought was the perfect attack on progressive policies. Her composed, unreadable expression suggested she believed she had cornered her opponent with an argument that couldn't be countered, but she had no idea what was coming next. Jonathan Roumie, the acclaimed American actor and a freshman public servant, sat across the stage with a calm demeanor that masked the profound conviction he was about to unleash. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only destroy Sanders' argument, but leave the entire audience on their feet, cheering for a newcomer who had just schooled one of politics' most seasoned veterans. The moment Roumie opened his mouth, Sanders' face would change from composed to stunned in a way that millions of viewers would never forget. Before we dive into this epic political showdown that's already breaking the internet, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and smash that subscribe button so you never miss these incredible political moments that define our times. Sarah Huckabee Sanders walked into that debate hall carrying the weight of decades in political warfare. This was the woman who had managed a gubernatorial campaign, served as a principal White House spokesperson, survived countless media battles, and earned a reputation as someone who could defend any situation with resolute calm. Her sharp business suit and perfectly styled blonde hair reflected the polished image of a political professional who had seen it all and won most of it. Sanders had built her career on being unshakable. She was known for her ability to stay on message, pivot, and reframe any political attack with disciplined precision. Her opponents had learned to respect her steadfastness and her talent for delivering her party's message with unwavering authority. She had faced senators, governors, and media personalities, always emerging with her reputation for composure intact. Tonight, she believed she was facing just another young politician who could be easily overwhelmed by experience and political savvy. But Jonathan Roumie represented something Sanders hadn't fully prepared for. A new voice in public service who combined a profound understanding of human nature and compelling delivery honed through years of acting, with an unshakable commitment to his principles. At just 48 years old, Roumie had already made waves, not in Congress, but through his impactful portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen, bringing a unique perspective to public discourse. As an actor, particularly one known for roles that demand deep moral conviction, he understood that authenticity mattered more than spin, where truth resonated more deeply than rhetoric, and where genuine connection could defeat even the most experienced opponents. His path to this moment had been carefully constructed through years of artistic practice that had honed his ability to connect with audiences under pressure and deliver arguments with persuasive power and moral clarity. Unlike many politicians who had spent their careers mastering the art of the talking point, Roumie had spent his mastering the art of authentic connection and profound truth-telling. Roumie's background was utterly different from the typical politician Sanders was used to facing. Born and raised in New York City, before making his mark in the entertainment world and now entering public service, he understood both the struggles of everyday Americans and the complex human motivations that underpin political policy. His colleagues had quickly learned that underestimating his ability to cut through rhetoric to the heart of an issue and deliver that truth with compelling sincerity was a mistake they only made once. What made Roumie particularly dangerous as an opponent was his ability to combine the directness of deeply held conviction with the accessibility and emotional resonance required for truly effective political communication. He had learned to translate complex political concepts into language that resonated with the soul while maintaining the precision that made his arguments difficult to counter. In preparing for this debate, Roumie had approached it like he would a major role, immersing himself in the subject matter, understanding the motivations of the characters, the people affected, and preparing to deliver a performance rooted in authentic conviction and moral truth. This wasn't just another political debate between two individuals from different perspectives. This was a clash between two entirely different approaches to politics. Sanders' world of disciplined communication and executive defense versus Roumie's approach of authentic conviction, profound empathy, and resonant truth. The audience knew they were watching something special unfold. Political insiders had been buzzing about this matchup for weeks, wondering how the veteran Sanders would handle the rising voice Roumie. Some expected Sanders' experience to overwhelm the newcomer. Others suspected that Roumie's fresh approach might catch Sanders off guard. What nobody expected was just how completely and devastatingly Roumie would dismantle not just Sanders' argument, but her entire approach to political discourse. The stage was set for a political moment that would be replayed thousands of times and analyzed for years to come. Sarah Huckabee Sanders leaned forward in her chair, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who had perfected this routine over decades of political combat. She had chosen her target carefully, progressive spending policies that she believed would be easy to attack and difficult to defend. The former White House press secretary adjusted her posture with the practiced ease of someone who had delivered thousands of political arguments across cable news shows, congressional hearings, and debate stages. Her burgundy blazer was perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless under the bright studio lights, every detail calculated to project authority and competence. Let me be very clear about what we're seeing from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, Sanders began, her firm voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding attention. These spending proposals aren't just irresponsible, they're economically destructive. We're talking about trillions of dollars in new spending that will burden our children and grandchildren with debt they'll never be able to repay. She paused for effect, scanning the audience with the practiced eye of a political performer who knew how to work a room. The camera caught her slight, composed nod, the expression of someone who believed she had just set a trap that her opponent couldn't escape. Her fingers drummed once on the debate table, a subtle gesture that conveyed both confidence and barely contained energy. Sanders' team had prepared her extensively for this moment. They had run through potential response, crafted sound bites, and identified what they believed were Roumie's weaknesses. Sanders felt ready for any direction the conversation might take, secure in the knowledge that her years of experience had prepared her for virtually any political challenge a freshman public servant could present. And the most troubling part isn't just the spending itself, Sanders continued, her voice rising with practiced earnestness. It's the complete lack of accountability. These programs promise everything to everyone while providing concrete solutions to no one. It's political fantasy masquerading as policy. She turned slightly toward Roumie, her tone becoming more pointed. My colleague here, for all his passion, represents a perspective that prioritizes grand, often theatrical, gestures over the practical, fiscally responsible solutions that actually help the working families in his district. The audience stirred. Some nodded in agreement with Sanders' critique, while others shifted uncomfortably. Sensing the personal nature of the attack, Sanders had done what she did best, framed the debate in terms that made her opponent look both naive and out of touch with practical governance. Sanders wasn't finished. She had spent too many years in political combat to deliver just a single blow when she could land a combination that would leave her opponent reeling. Let's talk specifics, she said, pulling out a folder that she had placed strategically on the table beside her. The infrastructure bill alone costs more than the entire GDP of most countries. The climate provisions will eliminate jobs in traditional energy sectors without providing concrete replacement opportunities, and the social programs create dependencies instead of pathways to independence. She looked directly at Roumie now, her expression mixing challenge with what appeared to be genuine concern. I respect my colleague's passion. I truly do. But passion without practical experience leads to policies that sound good in campaign speeches, but fail in real life. We need leaders who understand that good intentions aren't enough. We need results. The moderator attempted to interject, but Sanders raised her hand with the authority of someone used to controlling the flow of conversation. No, this is important. This is exactly the kind of discussion American voters deserve to hear. She turned back to Roumie, her voice taking on a tone of patient, almost patronizing concern that was somehow more dismissive than direct aggression. Jonathan, I've been in rooms where these decisions get made. I've seen how policies that look perfect on paper create unintended consequences in the real world. Experience matters. Wisdom that comes from years of seeing what works and what doesn't, that matters. Sanders' strategy was becoming clear to political observers in the audience. She wasn't just attacking Roumie's policies. She was systematically undermining his credibility as a legitimate public voice. By repeatedly emphasizing her own executive experience while highlighting Roumie's relative newcomer status in politics, she was creating a narrative that would be difficult for any freshman public servant to overcome. The former press secretary had used this approach successfully in countless previous encounters. She had learned that questioning an opponent's qualifications often proved more effective than debating the merits of specific policies. Voters, she had observed, often responded more strongly to arguments about competence and experience than to detailed policy discussions. Sanders leaned back in her chair, her expression suggesting she had just delivered a masterclass in political argumentation. Around the room, her supporters nodded approvingly. She had questioned Roumie's policies, his experience, and even his understanding of his own constituents' needs. What Sanders didn't realize was that her systematic approach to undermining Roumie's credentials had provided her opponent with the perfect framework for a devastating response. By making the debate about experience versus principle, Sanders had unknowingly created the exact battleground where Roumie's profound understanding of character and truth would prove most effective. The camera panned across the audience, capturing faces that reflected the tension in the room. Some viewers looked impressed by Sanders' systematic dismantling of progressive policies. Others appeared uncomfortable with the personal nature of her attacks, but most were focused intently on Roumie, waiting to see how the public servant would respond to this comprehensive challenge to everything he represented politically. Sanders sat back with visible satisfaction, clearly believing she had created an impossible situation for her opponent. How could a freshman public servant, however compelling an actor, counter decades of executive experience? How could passion and idealism stand against practical political wisdom? The silence stretched for several seconds as all eyes turned to Jonathan Roumie. Sanders' composed smile widened slightly, interpreting the pause as the evidence that her opponent was struggling to formulate a response to such a thorough political dismantling. She had no idea that Roumie wasn't struggling to find an answer. He was simply calibrating his response for maximum impact, preparing to deliver a truth that would resonate far beyond the debate hall. Roumie straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from thoughtful listening to focused intensity. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a skilled performer prepared to deliver a monologue that would move an entire audience. Sanders, still basking in what she believed was her successful attack, didn't notice the shift in her opponent's demeanor. She was too busy enjoying what she thought was her moment of triumph to recognize that she had just walked into a trap more sophisticated than any she had ever set herself. The audience sensed something was about to happen. The energy in the room shifted as people leaned forward in their chairs. Phones came up to record, and even the camera operators seemed to adjust their positions to capture what was coming next. Sarah Huckabee Sanders had just given Jonathan Roumie the perfect setup for a response that would not only answer every criticism, but would expose the fundamental flaws in Sanders' entire approach to politics. Jonathan Roumie's response began with a calm that was more unsettling than any show of anger could have been. He looked directly at Sanders, his voice carrying the steady authority of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. "Sarah, I appreciate the lecture about executive experience and practical governance. I really do," Roumie began, his tone respectful, but with an edge that suggested something powerful was coming. "But before we talk about my perceived lack of experience, let's talk about what your experience actually produced." The first hint of uncertainty flickered across Sanders' face. This wasn't the defensive response she had expected. Roumie wasn't trying to justify his policies or argue about the details of spending bills. He was going somewhere else entirely. Roumie continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "You mentioned that you've been in the rooms where decisions get made. You're absolutely right, you have been. And those rooms, during your time in the White House, gave us policies that increased the deficit more than any administration in history while providing tax cuts primarily to corporations and wealthy individuals who didn't need them." He leaned forward slightly, his actor's command of pacing and delivery evident in the power of his argument. "You talk about burdening our children with debt, but where was that concern when your administration added more than $7 trillion to the national debt? Where was that fiscal responsibility when you were defending tax cuts that primarily benefited people who were already doing just fine?" The audience began to stir. This wasn't the confused, defensive response Sanders had anticipated. Roumie was systematically addressing each point Sanders had made, but he was doing it by turning Sanders' own arguments against the record she helped defend. Roumie's voice took on the resonant cadence of a seasoned orator, delivering a truth that cut through rhetoric. "You criticize infrastructure spending, but your administration promised an infrastructure week that never came. You promised to rebuild America's roads and bridges, but what did we get? More tax cuts for corporations that were already profitable, while our actual infrastructure continued to crumble." Sanders tried to interject, but Roumie continued with the relentless precision of someone who had anticipated every possible interruption. And let's talk about job creation, since you mentioned eliminating jobs in traditional energy sectors. Your experience gave us policies that eliminated jobs in renewable energy while propping up dying industries that were already being outcompeted by market forces. Now Roumie's tone shifted slightly, becoming more pointed as he addressed Sanders' patronizing comments about experience and wisdom. Sarah, you said that passion without experience leads to failed policies. But what does experience without principles lead to? What does political wisdom without moral courage produce? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sanders' composed expression was beginning to crack as she realized she was facing an opponent who wasn't just defending policies, but was systematically exposing the contradictions in her entire political philosophy. Roumie's background as an actor became evident as he methodically unveiled the emotional and moral inconsistencies in Sanders' arguments, with the profound understanding of someone portraying a character of unwavering conviction. You mentioned that these programs create dependencies instead of pathways to independence. Let's examine that claim with actual evidence and a bit of human empathy instead of political talking points. He turned slightly to address the audience while keeping Sanders in his peripheral vision. The child tax credit that we expanded, the one your administration opposed, lifted more children out of poverty in a single year than any program in recent history. Those aren't handouts, Sarah. Those are investments in human dignity, and they produce results. The energy in the room was shifting dramatically. What had started as Sanders' dominant performance was becoming a masterclass in how to turn an opponent's arguments against them. Roumie wasn't just responding to criticism, he was using Sanders' own words to expose the failures of the policies Sanders had helped implement and defend. You talk about accountability, Roumie continued, his voice rising with controlled passion. Where was the accountability when your administration separated families at the border? Where was the accountability when pandemic response became a political issue instead of a public health priority? Where was the accountability when disinformation became an official communication strategy? For the first time since the debate began, scattered applause broke out from the audience. It wasn't organized or coordinated. It was the spontaneous response of people who were witnessing someone speak truth to power with devastating effectiveness. Sanders' face was now showing visible signs of discomfort. This wasn't going according to any script she had prepared for. She had expected to debate policy details, not to have her entire record systematically dissected by someone who had clearly done his homework on human impact. Roumie sensed the shift in the room's energy and prepared to deliver what would become the most quoted moment of the entire exchange. His voice became quieter, forcing the audience to lean in to hear his words, a technique that made his final argument even more powerful. Sarah, you asked me to explain how I justify supporting these policies to my constituents. Let me turn that question around. How do you justify years of defending policies that, despite your steadfast communication, demonstrably failed to uplift all people? Then came the moment that would be replayed countless times on social media and political analysis shows. Roumie's voice combined an actor's resonant sincerity with moral authority as he delivered his final argument. You say I lack experience, and you're right. I lack experience in delivering lines I don't believe. I lack experience in performing a part that prioritizes political loyalty over the truth of human suffering. I lack experience in telling people that policies which deepen their struggles actually worked, just not in ways that brought them genuine relief or hope. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. If that's the kind of experience you're offering, Sarah, then I'm proud to be inexperienced, because sometimes fresh eyes and a heart open to universal truths can see solutions that experienced eyes have become too comfortable ignoring. The response was immediate and thunderous. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to build on itself, with people rising to their feet in appreciation of what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just political theater. It was a fundamental dismantling of the idea that experience alone qualified someone to lead, especially when that experience included defending policies that had demonstrably failed. Sanders sat in stunned silence, her carefully prepared talking points rendered useless by an opponent who had turned the entire framework of the debate against her. She had come prepared to attack Roumie's policies and experience. She hadn't prepared to defend her own record against someone who had clearly studied it with the thoroughness of a performer embodying profound principle. The applause continued for what felt like minutes. with camera crews capturing not just Roumie's triumphant expression, but Sanders' visible shock at how completely her attack had been turned against her. Political reporters in the audience were already typing furiously on their phones, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would define both individuals' public careers in different ways. Roumie sat calmly as the applause continued, not basking in the victory, but maintaining the professional composure that had made his response so devastating. He had proven that he could not only defend his positions, but could do so while exposing the fundamental weaknesses in his opponent's entire approach to politics. Sanders, meanwhile, appeared to be still processing what had just happened. The confident political operator who had entered the debate believing she could easily overwhelm a freshman public servant was now facing the reality that she had been systematically outmaneuvered by someone she had underestimated. Before the debate had even officially ended, the moment was already going viral across every social media platform. Someone in the audience had captured the exact second when Sanders' composed expression changed to one of stunned realization. And that image was spreading faster than any political meme in recent memory. The speed of the viral moment was unprecedented. Within the first hour, the main clip had been viewed over 500,000 times across multiple platforms. Young users on social media were creating reaction videos, with many commenting that they had never seen someone dismantle a political argument with such surgical precision and authentic conviction. Within minutes, hashtags like #RoumieTruth and #ExperiencePrinciples were trending nationally. The clip of Roumie's final response, "I'm proud to be inexperienced," was being shared, retweeted, and reposted by thousands of users who recognized they had just witnessed a defining political moment. Memes began flooding social media feeds. The most popular showed Sanders' shocked face with captions like, "When you realize your opponent came prepared to speak truth," and "that moment when authentic conviction beats political spin." Another viral meme paired Roumie's calm expression during his response with the caption, "When you've been waiting your whole career to play this role." Political commentators who had been watching the debate live immediately began analyzing what they had seen. One prominent political analyst tweeted, "Just watch Jonathan Roumie give a masterclass in how to turn an opponent's attack into their own defeat. This is what happens when profound empathy meets political strategy." International observers also took notice. Political commentators from other countries began sharing the clip as an example of how American political discourse was evolving, with many noting that Roumie's style represented a departure from traditional political rhetoric towards something more resembling a moral indictment. News organizations that had expected to cover a routine political debate suddenly found themselves with a major story. The video of Roumie's response was being played on news shows within hours, with analysts breaking down not just what he said, but how he said it. A veteran political reporter noted, "Sanders came prepared for a typical political debate, ready to deliver her administration's talking points. Roumie came prepared to speak truth with the conviction of a performer embodying profound principle." The difference in preparation showed in the results. The contrast between the two individuals' approaches became a talking point that extended far beyond the specific policies they had been debating. Political science professors began using the exchange as an example of how effective preparation and strategic thinking, rooted in a non-traditional background, could overcome apparent disadvantages in experience and name recognition. In the hours following the debate, Sarah Huckabee Sanders' team went into full damage control mode. Her social media accounts began posting clips from earlier in the debate where she had appeared more in control, trying to shift the narrative away from those final devastating minutes. Sanders herself attempted to reframe the exchange in a series of television interviews, arguing that while Roumie had delivered a spirited response, the fundamental policy questions remained unanswered. But political observers noted that her usually sharp media appearances seemed less confident than usual. A longtime Sanders ally privately admitted to reporters she prepared for the wrong debate. She thought she was facing another politician who would play by the usual rules. Roumie played by the rules of human truth instead. And in that arena, authenticity matters more than experience. For progressive political organizations and activists, Roumie's performance became an instant rallying cry. Organizations that had been looking for effective messengers to counter experienced conservative communicators suddenly had a template for how it could be done. The response from grassroots progressive groups was electric. Within hours of the debate, volunteer organizations were sharing the clip in their group chats and using it as recruitment material. This is what effective political communication looks like: read one widely shared message from a progressive organizing group. This is how we fight back against decades of political spin with genuine conviction. Fundraising emails went out within hours featuring quotes from Roumie's response and arguing that this was exactly the kind of principled leadership the progressive movement needed. Small dollar donations began pouring into Roumie's nascent public service initiatives from supporters energized by his performance. His team reported that they received more online donations in the 24 hours following the debate than they had in the previous 3 months combined. Young public servants across the country began studying the video, trying to understand how Roumie had managed to turn Sanders' experience argument against her so effectively. Political training organizations started incorporating clips from the debate into their communication workshops, with trainers noting that Roumie's approach represented a new model for political combat. Several prominent progressive leaders took to social media to praise Roumie's performance. One veteran activist wrote, "This is what happens when we send someone who understands the human heart to do politics' job." Roumie didn't just win an argument, he demonstrated a completely different approach to political discourse. But the impact extended beyond just progressive politics. Political observers across the spectrum recognized that they had witnessed something significant, a demonstration that the traditional advantages of experience and name recognition could be overcome by superior preparation and strategic thinking rooted in a unique perspective. Republican strategists began warning their candidates about underestimating younger opponents, particularly those with backgrounds in the arts or humanities who could speak with profound conviction. The Roumie-Sanders exchange became required viewing for political operatives who wanted to understand how quickly a debate could turn when one participant was significantly better prepared to articulate truth than the other. For Jonathan Roumie, the debate performance transformed him from a promising voice in public service to a national political figure. Overnight, speaking invitations poured in from across the country, with organizations eager to hear from the individual who had taken down one of conservative politics' most formidable communicators. The transformation was immediate and comprehensive. Roumie's team reported being inundated with interview requests from major news organizations, podcast hosts, and documentary filmmakers who wanted to understand how he had managed to so thoroughly outmaneuver Sanders. His press secretary, who had previously managed a relatively quiet schedule, suddenly found herself coordinating with national producers and international news outlets. His social media following exploded, with hundreds of thousands of new followers drawn by clips of his debate performance. Political betting markets began including his name in speculation about future national political contests, recognizing that he had demonstrated the kind of communication skills that could translate to larger political stages. More significantly, Roumie's performance began attracting attention from major Democratic donors who had previously focused their contributions on more established politicians. Several high-profile fundraising events were organized specifically to capitalize on his newfound national recognition, with political insiders noting that his donor base had expanded far beyond his initial supporters to include individuals from across the country. Political strategists began studying his approach, trying to understand whether his success could be replicated by other candidates with backgrounds focused on authenticity and storytelling. Several campaign consulting firms reached out to offer their services, recognizing that Roumie represented a new model for political communication that could be valuable in future campaigns. For Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the debate represented a rare but significant setback in what had been a highly successful career. While her supporters argued that one debate didn't erase decades of political achievement, there was no denying that she had been caught off guard by an opponent she had clearly underestimated. The immediate aftermath was particularly challenging for Sanders, who had built her reputation on being unflappable under political pressure. Conservative media outlets that had previously treated her as an unquestionable authority began questioning whether she had lost her edge. Some longtime supporters expressed concern that she had become too comfortable with her reputation and had failed to adequately prepare for a different kind of opponent. More significantly, the exchange seemed to symbolize a broader shift in American politics, where traditional advantages of experience and connections were increasingly being challenged by a new generation of public figures who brought different skills and perspectives to political combat. Political institutions began taking notice of what the debate represented. Drama schools and even theological institutions that had been encouraging their graduates to consider careers in public service found new interest from students inspired by Roumie's performance. Communication programs began incorporating the debate into their curricula as an example of how artistic training, especially in profound character portrayal, could be effectively applied to political discourse. The precision of Roumie's arguments and his systematic unveiling of Sanders's inconsistencies became a case study in effective political communication. Beyond the immediate political implications, the Roumie-Sanders exchange seemed to capture something broader about American culture in the 2020s. Social media users noted that it represented a clash between different generations' approaches to political discourse. Sanders's style of disciplined messaging and executive defense versus Roumie's more direct, empathy-based approach. Young Americans in particular responded enthusiastically to Roumie's performance, sharing clips with comments about how refreshing it was to see someone address political arguments with the directness typically reserved for profound moral discussions. Political scientists began analyzing the debate as an example of how changed media landscapes were affecting political communication. The fact that Roumie's most effective moments came not from traditional political rhetoric, but from a style of authentic, conviction-driven argumentation, suggested that audiences were becoming more receptive to different approaches to political discourse. Universities across the country began incorporating the debate footage into their political science and communication courses. Professor Sarah Martinez at a major state university noted, "This debate represents a fascinating case study in how professional training outside of politics can be effectively applied to political discourse." Roumie's acting background, especially playing roles of profound moral authority, gave him tools that traditional politicians often lack. Research institutions began studying whether the debate represented a broader trend of professionals from the arts and humanities, bringing their unique perspectives to political forums, and whether this approach might be more effective with contemporary audiences than traditional political communication strategies. Early polling data suggested that younger viewers in particular responded more positively to Roumie's direct, conviction-based approach than to Sanders's more traditional political messaging. Several academic conferences scheduled panels specifically to discuss the implications of the Roumie-Sanders exchange. Political communication scholars were particularly interested in how Roumie had managed to reframe the entire debate by turning Sanders's experience argument into a liability rather than an asset. A prominent political psychology researcher published a preliminary analysis suggesting that Roumie's approach had been effective because it aligned with changing public attitudes toward authority and expertise. Voters are increasingly skeptical of arguments based solely on experience or credentials, the researcher wrote. They want to see authenticity, empathy, and moral conviction, which is exactly what Roumie provided, drawing on a wellspring of understanding for the human condition. The debate also became a subject of international academic interest, with political scholars in other countries analyzing whether similar techniques might be effective in their own political systems. The debate also raised important questions about the future of American political discourse. If Roumie's approach represented a new model for political communication, what did that mean for candidates who had built their careers on traditional political skills? Some observers argued that the exchange demonstrated the need for politicians to be better prepared for opponents who might not follow traditional political debate conventions. Others suggested that it showed the value of bringing diverse professional backgrounds to political discourse. For both individuals, the debate represented a significant moment in their public careers, but for different reasons. Roumie had demonstrated that he belonged on the national public stage and possessed the communication skills necessary to compete with the most experienced political operators. Sanders, meanwhile, faced questions about whether her traditional approach to political communication remained effective against opponents who were prepared to challenge not just her arguments, but the entire framework within which those arguments were presented. Perhaps the most significant takeaway from the Roumie-Sanders exchange was the demonstration that in contemporary American politics, traditional advantages could be overcome by superior preparation, strategic thinking, and the willingness to challenge fundamental assumptions about how political discourse should be conducted. Roumie had shown that a freshman public servant with the right preparation and approach could not only hold his own against a seasoned political veteran, but could actually turn that veteran's apparent advantages against them. The debate became a reminder that in politics, as in art, the quality of your conviction and the thoroughness of your understanding often matter more than your experience or reputation. For young public servants looking for a model of how to compete against more experienced opponents, Jonathan Roumie had provided a masterclass in authentic communication and moral conviction that would be studied and emulated for years to come. Thanks for witnessing this incredible political moment where Jonathan Roumie showed the entire country how preparation, principles, and authentic conviction can overcome any opponent, no matter how experienced. This is exactly the kind of political discourse we need more of: direct, truth-based, and unafraid to challenge power. If you enjoyed watching Roumie school Sanders in political strategy, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss these amazing political moments. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Roumie's performance and who you'd like to see him debate next. These are the political battles that define our democracy, and we'll be here to break them all down for you.